Monday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.
Now then, very happy to say Gerry Thornley of the Irish Times here in studio. Good evening, hello.
Good evening, Joe. How are you?
Very well. Mr. Matt Williams joins us as well. Hey, Matt.
Hey, Joey. Hey, Gerry.
So Connacht, to get the weekend rolling, they were 36-14 winners against the Scarlets on Friday night. Matt Hansen scored 2 tries. They have the Ospreys before the November break, and a win there would put a real sheen on things. Ulster Sharks game postponed. There was a dreadful outbreak of food poisoning, it seems. 29 players, 13 staff unwell. E. coli and norovirus very much detected. They have Thomond next. They're flying home this afternoon. I'm not sure quite in what state, but not the finale to their South African tour that they were anticipating. And then, of course, 46,000 at the Aviva Stadium. Leinster 27, Munster 13 is about where we are on this Monday evening. You could, Gerry, take a glance at the scoreline if you didn't see the game and think, well, another routine win for Leinster. But the general consensus is Munster gave a very good account of themselves, their young players in particular. There is more that they can take from this loss than quite a few of the previous losses at the hands of Leinster.
Yeah, I'd go along with that, Joe, because in the first 4 games their skill levels were quite poor. We talked about this in the show before, whether there was information overload or just too much looking at the bigger picture and forgetting how to do the basics. But even good players with good skill levels were letting the catch pass, the depth, everything was a little bit off key. Against Leinster, there was some really good moments, really good passages of play, particularly in the second half, and even in the first. I'm thinking of that Joey Carberry skip pass for Kenyon Knox in the break when he went for the offload when he perhaps shouldn't have. The lovely hands from Jeremy Lockman and Dermot Barron's break. The front rowers actually were quite dynamic around the pitch. Jack O'Donoghue had a fantastic game, 19 tackles, that big kick-up field and chase and turnover in the build-up to try. The try itself was really well taken. Battering away, getting go forward ball, and then Conor Murray skip pass into Gavin Coombs, good animation off the ball to check the Leinster defence, and then his wonderful 20-yard right to left flat skip pass for his cousin to score. And that was with 14 men, and to go into the lead 6 minutes in the second half, I thought, whoa, okay, game on. And the Munster fans they'd been hardly audible at all, really, it seemed, up until then. But then suddenly, there's quite a few Munster fans here, and you could sense the hope in their voices. You know, a
few of them took off their coats all of a sudden, exactly, did they? And got their jersey on.
Yeah. And they were getting a little bit hopeful. Now, of course, thereafter, Leinster won the last 31 odd minutes 20-0. We can't forget that. I think there were a myriad of factors at work there. They had a couple of breakdown issues in the first half. Munster emanated at first from the collision, ball presentation, not resourcing and cleaning out properly, getting turned over twice. And this contributed to them having to make an enormous number of tackles, well over 100 in the first half. And very often, of course, that kind of effort takes its toll in the last 20 and 30 minutes. That's when better teams get their rewards in modern day rugby very often. And I can't help but also think that Leinster on another day would have made more than one of their 8 visits inside the Munster 22 into points, like Johnny Sexton missing a 3-pointer, Sexton knocking on, Healy knocking on, Dan Sheehan knocking on. Jason Jenkins and Dan Sheehan both held up over the line, both times by Conor Murray, which is, we take his defending for granted, but I'm not sure that many scrum halves could have positioned their bodies underneath the ball carrier like that. But I think also there was a bit of ill discipline, like 2 avoidable yellow cards, and I know they managed that 20 minutes pretty well. After the first Leinster try from Scott Penny, they came back and got 3 points, and then in the second 10 minutes, when they were down to 14 men, they actually won that period of the game 7-0. But all of this, I think, was part of the fact that it took its toll, and also they finished with a loose head, a tight head, a number 8 in the second row, and a hooker in the back row, as well as and lost Joey Carberry. So I think that all took its toll as well. But on balance, I think it was encouraging. Rowntree came in afterwards and said, he was very proud of his players, and he saw some real evidence of, green shoots, an improvement in their performance, and I think that's true. But the bottom line, Joe, is they've lost 4 of their first 6 games. They're down 11th place on 11 points. If they lose to Ulster this weekend, they vanish over the horizon as well as Leinster.
Matt, no doubt Leinster pulled away from Munster, and that's not in doubt, but at least it felt like Munster threw a shot in this game.
Yeah, I probably I have to say I'm not as positive about Munster as Gerry. I'm not positive about Leinster either. I thought they were very wasteful. I thought if they were really on their game, they would have demolished Munster. All the points that Gerry just brought up, and I thought it was a real lack of accuracy that we've seen a few times from Leinster this season that I haven't seen in recent years, especially in defence. In the past games, their set play defence in the last few games, not necessarily this weekend against Munster, but there's been some real problems at scrum time in defence where their last two backs, defending backs, are like they're playing a totally different system from their 10, 12 and 13. And that was, even though we didn't see that on Saturday in defence, I thought Leinster were very, very wasteful on Saturday. They should have won that game by a lot more. I'm not suggesting in any way that Munster didn't try their heart out and they weren't playing a different game plan than past seasons. There was a lot more constructiveness about the way they were going. Their skills were better, as Gerry pointed out. Some wonderful passing there leading up to the Coombs family combining for a try there with beautiful passing. But, it's a really strange time where Irish rugby has come that we're trying to find positives for Munster getting done 27-13 in front of 45,000 people and only 2 games to win for the season, and we're getting into November. So, look, and they have players out. I've got a list here. For Leinster players out, James Lowe, Hugo Kernan, Jamison Gibson-Park, Ronan Kelleher, Josh Van der Fleer, Jordan Lama Connors, Tracy, Reece Ruddock and Ryan Baird. And with the exception of Connors and Tracy, all of those players would make the match day 23. Now, Munster had a number of players out as well, especially in the centres there, Fekatara and Farrell. We don't know when we'll see Farrell again. But it's still a pretty gloomy picture. I know people are trying to be positive and polish it up a bit for Munster, but it's still a pretty gloomy state of affairs after that game because we've got to be honest. Leinster in third gear, not being accurate with all those players out, should have won by a considerably more margin.
I mean, it's hard to disagree, and certainly the Leinster party line afterwards was great disappointment at how they had failed to take opportunities early on, and they had 5 clean line breaks alone in the first half to Munster's none. And by their own admission, second half conditions deteriorated. Pressure game, points on the board, job done. Johnny Sexton said, not perfect. We haven't been at our best this season. We have shown glimpses. And I guess looking for a silver lining in that, he said, we would rather build across the season and hit our straps come the business end as opposed to being perfect out the gate. But Leinster were not perfect by their own admission. And I suppose, to Matt's point, Gerry, there is a degree of Munster are at such a low base that just an encouraging performance against Leinster is enough to have certain optimism in the post-match discussion.
Well, that's the way it is, particularly after those first 4 matches when the one win against Zebra was out of 4th try in the last 50-odd minutes of the match, so that wasn't much to celebrate either. But the Bulls win was encouraging, and I do see evidence of improvement in front of my own eyes, definitely. And I mean, that's the state of affairs we've got to with Munster, there's no doubt about it. They had a massive injury catalogue of their own, and plus 8 players. And we all know that when it becomes a test of strength and depth between Leinster and anybody else, there's only one winner, and that's Leinster. It's a great state of affairs for Leinster that they can record a bonus point win. They resorted to their power game. They got 3 of the 4 tries came from, going to the corner and just going to the forwards. It's ironic, really, when you think about it. If you said before one of the Leinster forwards was going to use great low centre of gravity and leg power to get over the line, you probably would have picked Scott Penny. But if you said one player was going to dart blind off a maul and throw a dummy and sprint over, and one player was going to power through 2 tackles, you probably would have had Dan Sheehan and Luke McGrath the other way around. That wasn't great defending by Munster at all. Yeah. But, ultimately, they've 28 points out of 30 without fully hitting their straps. That's not a bad place to be. One third of their match programme in, isn't it? 6, 12, 18, one third, and they've 28 points. They're not a million miles off the 60 odd to get a home semi-final. They're well on course for that. So it's a good state of affairs to be in if you're not quite playing brilliantly and you're still accumulating 28 points out of a possible 30.
Matt, are your reservations about the way Leinster ultimately had to resort to that power game that, come European time again, that may not be available to them, or what's the issue?
Well, it's... Johnny's always pretty brutally honest in his assessments, and I think he assessed it very well. They just haven't been as good as they have been. I think there's a number of reasons for that. They've obviously carrying some huge emotional disappointment from last season. They sent a huge number of players away to New Zealand with the Test side and the A side in the summer, and that takes its toll. We obviously haven't seen Hugo Coonan back in the game with Jamison Gibson-Park yet.
Or James Lowe.
Or James Lowe, I'm sorry, Gerry, you're dead right. And they do rely on Lowe, left boot, so much to get them into those positions. I would also agree with Johnny that I'm not unhappy with that. I think this time last year, Leinster were cruising along in overdrive, and they were head and shoulders above everyone in Europe. And look what happened at the end of the season. I'm not unhappy with that. I am unhappy with the defence in particular, and I think this would be, again, I suppose it's a bit like the Munster thing, trying to find the positive out of the negative with Lancaster leaving Leinster. I do think Stewart has too much on his plate with defence and attack. I just think those days are over, and I think that is showing sometimes, especially in Leinster's D. And teams that want to take them on wide, as we've seen in the first few games, are getting some success against Leinster. The Sharks game in particular was a cracking game of rugby. It was exactly what the competition needed. I really enjoyed it. It's been the most enjoyable game of the season to watch. But a lot of that was because Leinster's system, not their tackling, but their system let them down. And I think that's something they're going to have to look at. So what does that mean? Leinster aren't cracking the whips right now. I think a lot of the boys have their eyes on South Africa. I think that is going to be a pivotal. The South Africa game at home and the France game at home this year are the two big games for Ireland before the World Cup, and I think that is looming large on a lot of radars. And I would be more. I think I'd give my judgment. Let's come after Christmas on where Leinster are. I think we'll know a little bit more about them. But how can you complain when Gerry just said, I looked at the ladder just before we came on air and I went, wow, look where they are. They are so far out in front.
Matt,
and not playing well.
Two of the games they conceded 10 tries were Zebra away and Sharks away. They were the two games that Charlie Natai started in midfield. And I do think that there was him getting used to them and them getting used to him, that there was a bit of bunching in midfield that left the outside backs very exposed. I think 5 of those 10 tries were first phase tries, which is very, as you say, very unusual, but I would attribute that to some degree to Charles Natai fitting into their system and them getting used to him.
I think that's a really valid argument, Gerry. My concern was the try, I can't think I think it was the second try that the Sharks scored, and Robbie Henshaw was playing outside centre at that particular time, and the gap between Robbie or the lack of cohesion between Robbie and the last two defenders was like they were playing a totally different system. The inside guys were sliding and the other guys were jamming in, and they didn't take their man. Now, look, that happens in a season and things go wrong, and it's very different defending from inside centre to outside centre, and Robbie Henshaw is one of our greatest ever defenders. So it's not something to panic about, but it's certainly something that I've seen that I haven't seen in the past.
I've heard it suggested that Gary Ringrose was so effective on the wing in that game that maybe they should consider moving Gary to the wing and getting Bundy Aki, Robbie Henshaw, Gary Ringrose whenever they're all fit, which of course is seldom enough, or not suspended, get them all to pitch at the same time. But for me, Gary Ringrose is the best defender at 13 of them all. It's a very difficult position to defend, and he knows it. He often has 2, 3, 4 missed tackles in a match, but they're really good missed tackles because he shoots out and he cuts out the outside, and somebody has to go back in the inside where he's engulfed by the peloton or by the traffic. He's a brilliant defender, as well as being a brilliant attacker and playing superb rugby at the moment. I wouldn't shift him from 13 for a second.
Gerry, I agree, and people forget 13 is the hardest position on the field to defend, because at certain points as a 13 you've got to leave that inside guy and go to the next guy. And when you get, we've been spoiled with O'Driscoll and Ringrose because they just make it look easy, and it's not. They're along with Jason Little, they're the 3 best sliding defenders at 13 I've seen, and that is such a great skill. I still maintain the worst selection I've seen in my lifetime as a coach was leaving Ringrose out of the last Lions tour, and the Lions paid a price for that when they didn't play a specialist outside centre in that role. And so I agree with you. I think you put Gary at inside, you put him on the wing, you play well. But as far as I'm concerned, he's got the Irish 13 jersey at this stage and going forward.
Should have taken Johnny Sexton too, but never mind.
Absolutely. And James Ryan.
Couldn't play 3 games in a row. Remember, that was the rationale. Proved that wrong a year later, didn't he, down in New Zealand?
Well, look, a few wrote Johnny off, in fairness.
Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah, exactly. Just to tease out Munster for a second then, Matt, because Gerry's point even at the outset of the piece, on 45 minutes when Coombs scores that try, Munster are 13-7 up.
Yeah.
Now, admittedly, Dan Sheehan does score a response 4 minutes later, but Munster are 13-7 up. Joey Carberry has to go off injured in 54 minutes. Other players are going off around then in that 50 to 60 minute period. The average age of the Munster bench is 23. They do not have the squad to compare with Leinster. Absolutely no question. So they were always going to lose the last 25 minutes of that game, I think. But if you judge them up to 45 minutes, again, it's a low base and it's a weird way of looking at it. But if you judge them off those first 45 minutes when Coombs scores that try, are you playing down a touch how much improved they were? Like that was a quantum leap from what they've done earlier in this season. That points to good things, no?
I certainly not disagreeing with that, Joe. I'm not trying to talk the Munster players down. I thought they showed what you expect from anyone that pulls on that Munster jersey. In all my years coaching against Munster at Leinster and Ulster when I was coaching, every time those buggers ran on the field with a red jersey, they were hard, they were tough, they never quit. It didn't matter who was on the field, you knew you were up for a battle that day. And that should be the prerequisite. That's 101. You pull on that Munster jersey, that's what we expect from you. So in some ways, what I'm suggesting is not degrading what the guys that played on Saturday did. I'm saying that's what we expect every week.
Sure.
You go out and you show that.
No, I accept that, but in reality, I mean, 10, 15 years ago is an irrelevance to this team. I'm talking about versus last year or the last 2 years where these Leinster-Munster occasions have been non-events. Yeah,
well, it's been 1 from 10. Last time they won in the league was 2018. Certainly not trying to talk them down. And they are young, and that I agree that when it comes to depth, Leinster are always going to do it. I just think this Munster team have a long, long path in front of them. You don't grow up quick in professional sport. It takes time. And if I take my shirt off, I can show you the scars. It hurts coaches on the way through as they're developing. So they are in a process. They are on a journey. But I don't think this is something we're going to see, really come quickly, or it's just going to be all fixed next week. This is going to be a long process that will have a lot of, so hopefully some good days like they did the other week. And I agree with Gerry, they played really, really well against the Bulls, but it's not, they're going to be ups and downs because that's what young teams give you. They give you that inconsistency. And when they come up against top class, like they did with Leinster, you get that performance. You're in it, you're fighting, but you just haven't quite got what it takes.
Even when Leinster went back in the lead, to Munster's credit, they went back downfield and twice went to the corner. And unfortunately for their sake, then had a scrum, and Andrew Porter just transformed the scrums when he came on, transformed the game even. But they were still hammering away, even going into the last 10 minutes. They possibly punched themselves out and trying to go for score. Some Munster people I spoke to after the game maintained that at 22-13, instead of those 2 penalties to corner, they should have taken 3 points, get to within 1 score, 6 points adrift, and also put themselves in bonus point territory. Of course, hindsight is 20/20 vision. It's very easy to say with hindsight, but my argument against that was if they took 3 points and got back to 22-16 and the rest of the game materialised as it did, panned out the way it did, with Leinster going down pitch and getting their 4th try, everybody would have said, well, why didn't they go to the corner?
Yeah, maybe. And
also, interestingly, Graham Rowntree had no criticisms, no qualms with their decision at all. He wants them to have a go at teams, and he backs his players what they did in the pitch.
Yeah. I mean, I heard him, that was an interesting interview, and he said, hindsight's perfect, and shut down the question. But I think in rugby, this is a very routine debate about taking points and kicking to the corner. It's easy to say, well, hindsight's everything, but I agree with you. I thought we'll get some points on the board and get close to them. But
then if Leinster had gone down the pitch and won 27-16, everybody would have said, why didn't you go to the corner? On
Matt's point, in our, desperation for Munster to get back, are we reading too much into this? A bunch of young players having a bit of a go, but really, I mean, there's still just an absolutely enormous gap for them to be anywhere close to Leinster anytime soon.
Well, could both be true, I suppose. There are encouraging signs, and yet there is still an enormous gap. I think that's probably the reality. Like, that's 12 defeats out of 13 at the Aviva against Leinster. This is nothing new. It's a dog-eared script. I think we should celebrate the fact that it was very competitive and the crowd of 45,000 plus.
Yeah, it was good fair.
You've got to give, it was good fair, and hats off to Mick Dawson, the machine he's built in his last home game, that they could get an attendance like that was 13,000 more than for the corresponding fixture last May. I mean, this is at a time, as we spoke before in this show, when crowds are down at Leinster, Munster, Ulster, Connacht, across the board in Wales and Scotland and England. But the only country that seems utterly immune from this is the French top 14. Every time I put it on, it's just packed stadium everywhere you look. But that's just an incredible brand. They know how to sell their competition for sure, and it is all in one country. That has an advantage as well. But I thought, look, the proof will be in the pudding. And the question is, you see, it's still a results-driven business, and if as things stand, they're in 11th place. And they're well down on where they were at this point last season, about 10 points less. Yeah. And if they don't get into the top 8, they don't qualify for the Champions Cup next season, and that's a really devastating blow for the organisation. I've heard it argued that, they have a better chance of winning the Challenge Cup than they would the Champions Cup. But that really would be a sad state of affairs, because for starters, Thornley would be 50% less than would have been the case otherwise if they're playing in the Challenge Cup.
Matt, so taking your headline analysis, which is, let's not get ahead of ourselves here at all on Munster, and I suspect you're probably right on that. What did strike you as different from the Van Graan era? What did encourage you, and what individuals maybe caught your eye?
I think Gerry's point there, that they did have a crack and go for the corner. I agree there was an argument to go for the 3, but I think that the lack of box kicking and the lack of one-off runners that just run headlong into a defence, I thought was there is a change there, and that's definitely a change, and that's a positive thing for sure. And I can see that change, and the fact that the young players feel empowered to do that says a lot for what the coaches are trying to do with them. And the coaches have got 2 things happening there, Joe. They've got to speak publicly and keep their players up and keep the crowd, the supporters up. That's part of your role as a coach. And then behind closed doors, they've got to be driving their players and encourage them. And they can't let these young players get their heads down and drop their heads because they're getting beaten. They're on a long journey, as I've said, to move forward and to grow. And in years to come, there's a lot of talent there. Coombs, I just got a note here. Gavin Coombs, I've been watching for a few years and been really hopeful of him, but he missed crucial tackles in past years that I think has held him back. I think he's really matured. Barron as hook, I thought, had a really good game, really, really good game, and I thought he stepped up, and you could see him sort of looking at the blue jerseys and saying, I respect you, but I don't really respect you that much. I'm going at you. And that was really positive. Like, he was aggressive, he was in everything, he was brave, and he led from the front. Harnett was good as well. Jack Donoghue had a good game. And I thought Joey Carberry, poor Joey getting injured again. Leinster had this trap for Joey. They weren't going to let him use his feet. And they came up in numbers quick around him all the time. Joey kept his cool. I thought he had a positive game. And I also thought Crowley as a second playmaker really had a positive impact on the game. So there's lots of good things there. Yes. And lots of I wouldn't, Scannell Goggin up against the two probably one of the best centre combinations in the world at the moment. And they were behind, but they hung in there bravely. They fought hard. But that's something to build on for sure. That's something to build on for sure. And especially, if you look at that back row, I thought it showed a fair bit. They probably lacked a bench compared to the Leinster bench, when you bring a Porter on off the bench, wow.
And Jack Conan.
And you've got, Jack Conan, and you've got Furlong out, by the way. You still can afford to have Porter on your bench. It's another line in Conan to come off and give you some thump and go forward as well. So it was, and look, on the other side of that, I thought Kieran Frawley, who's really come on well at fullback, I thought had a very positive game as well.
Well, Joey Carberry's injury may be his opportunity, which we'll come to in just a moment. Gerry, on your point there, and it's an interesting thought experiment almost for Rowntree and the coaching staff at Munster. You said it's a results business, and yet there's got almost a positivity about a loss and not even a losing bonus point at the weekend. I always remember, it was at the RDS, I think it was the Guinness Pro 14, it's hard to remember the various names of this thing, the Pro 14 semi-final, and Leinster won about 24-9 territory at the RDS in 2019. And Munster didn't land a shot. And it was incredibly demoralising. And I remember thinking that day, this Van Graan era, it's going nowhere. And it's never going to go anywhere, is the brutal reality. Could Munster, playing this brand of rugby and having some good days, and as Matt said, some bad days, could Rowntree and team, if they do that, be afforded almost more patience than we might otherwise expect from the crowd and from the hierarchy? That, OK, we can see this is a rebuild, but it's an exciting one. And so maybe you don't even make Champions Cup and that will be OK. Or are there certain non-negotiables here, you think, for this coaching ticket and what they have to achieve?
I think if you look back on Leo Cullen's first year, Pat Lamb's first year, coaches need time. They didn't have very good first years at all. I think it was Lamb's third year and Leo's third year when they make the breakthrough into silverware. Yeah. So you have to bear that in mind. I think the Munster fan base will be enthused by the amount of talented young players coming through. I think what also will appeal to the Munster support base is the fact that Mikey Prendergast and Dennis Leamy are part of the ticket as well. I think over a period of time there will be a more coherent strategy from this Munster coaching ticket. You think back to last season and how Munster were basically going to their power game up front to bully sides to get those bonus point wins at the start of the season, and by the end came to the Aviva Stadium, were throwing the ball around like they were the barbarians and coming up short. Like, what were Munster last season? I think we'll have a clear idea of this Munster team over a shorter period of time about what they're actually trying to achieve. So I do think they will be given a little bit more patience. But that being said, they really need a win this weekend, I think, to end this window on a positive note, to still be in touch with the top 8, to believe themselves that they're going in the right direction, because confidence is a huge thing.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I think also they probably, of all the 4 provinces, they look like the ones who are probably going to benefit the most from a November break, because they're just looking a bit battle weary and they have an awful lot of injuries. And normally the games would run through November. I think for all of all the 4 provinces, they're the ones that probably need a November break. Although they do have a sellout in Páirc Uí Chaoimh, don't they, against the Springboks?
Yeah, which could be an occasion. Matt, your thoughts on the latitude which might be afforded to the coaching ticket? Because there's no doubt if Van Graan had written in these results, I'd say he had never left, and this was where they were, he'd be under. I mean, you could imagine the things which would be being called for at this stage, whereas we're nowhere near that clearly with Rowntree, and he's just in the door. But do you think they might be afforded a lot more latitude?
Well, I think they are right now, Joe, for all the reasons you just said. Like, if Johan Van Graan was still there, they'd be throwing rocks in the windows, like that he'd be really under the pump. They've played poorly this year. You can't dodge that. Now, everyone's saying it's a rebuild, it's all that. They've got some young players there. That's definitely true. And there's a lot of stuff, getting said now about what was happening when Johan was there. And I really just dismiss all of that. I just can't. I actually find it quite offensive that people would say that. They didn't have the courage to say it when it was happening. And then they're saying, there were culture problems, there's fitness, there's systems, we had to get him out the door. And now their performance is worse than when he was there. So I think people just need to lay off Johan Van Graan, in my own opinion, and start saying, well, what are you doing now? Should this coaching staff be given time? Absolutely. Munster is pretty much a mess. We've just said it. They could miss out on the Heineken Cup next year, the Champions Cup. That's the reality. They're a mess, and that mess needs sorting out. And if you keep moving leadership around, senior leadership, you're going to end up in a deeper mess. So these coaches need to, they're good coaches, quality men. They've been at other organisations. We know they're quality. Some of them are Munster absolute favourite sons of the club. They've come back. They need to be afforded time. This is what I was trying to say before. This isn't a season job. This isn't like everything's going to be fine come next April.
Yeah.
This is 18 months, 24 months of hard work, some really tough days, some great days, but some really tough days in there, and they've got to just get through that time.
Okay, fair enough. By the way, Van Graan got a fair old kicking on this show to his face. I'm not sure that's quite the way to put it, but geez, the last 6 months I thought it was very tempestuous, certainly here in most quarters anyway. Keith,
I think guess what I'm getting at, Joe, is people coming out and saying the culture was wrong, their fitness, the standards. Look, players drive the standards, and they got really senior players down at Munster. You know, it's like, are you going to tell me that Peter O'Mahony and Joey and Conor Murray and Damien Delonde are not going to drive standards. They're great players.
Yeah.
So look, you can't just throw standards back at a coach at that level with those players. Players push it. Players look at each other and go, mate, that's not good enough. It's not just the coach demanding this. It's the organisation. The greatest player, O'Driscoll, mate, he'd take your head off if you went up to the right standards on the training park. He demanded it. So it's just not a single coach issue. That's just too simple. It's a lot broader, a lot more organisational than just the coach.
Fair point. I have to take a quick break. Just a word on Luke McGrath, Gerry, because he certainly dominated some of the post-match conversation. Man of the match, closing in on probably 200 Leinster appearances this season. He might just get in the door at 200 this season. Still only 29. 19 caps under Joe Schmidt. Last game was the 2019 World Cup. And people say, well, should he be brought back into the fold? I guess Gibson-Park seems to have won that war. Craig Casey and Conor Murray are vying for number 2. John Cooney, I suspect, is saying, what about me, everyone? So there's a lot of competition there for McGrath to leapfrog.
There's 4 capped Irish scrum halves not in the squad.
Okay.
So Luke McGrath, the two Connacht, Kieran Marmion and Caelan Blade, and John Cooney. Interestingly, John Cooney could switch his allegiance to Scotland now if he wanted to. And I think Luke McGrath could switch his allegiance to Canada now if he wanted to under this new World Rugby 3-year ruling. He was born in Canada while his parents lived in Ontario for 4 years. But he doesn't talk like somebody who's really considering that option to his career. Maury talks about how much he loves playing for Ireland, has greatest days been playing for Ireland, and he still wants to get back in there. He was given a glimmer of hope by being called in last November. He did try out that one loose pass which led to the Munster try, but in pretty much every other respect he was very, very, very good. He was quick to base, got the ball away quickly, and his carrying game was quite extraordinary. Like that try going through 2 tackles, that was
strong.
One of 6 carries for 72 metres, which you wouldn't normally associate with Luke McGrath. So he's playing very, very good rugby at the moment. It's an extraordinary position of depth and strength and depth at the moment.
It sure is. Gerry Thornley, Matt Williams staying with us. Back in just 1 second.
Monday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.
Monday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.
You're very welcome back. Gerry Thornley of the Irish Times still with us. Matt Williams as well is on the line. Hey Matt, here's one to get you in trouble. So your favourite type.
Thanks, Jack.
Yeah.
You don't bother.
Jamie Heaslip was on the TV coverage afterwards. They were talking about Johnny Sexton, and he said Sexton's the best Irish player I've ever seen.
Hard to argue with, isn't it? He's extraordinary. It's an awful question.
It's an awful question, sorry.
It's an awful question because, is he better than Brian? Is he better than Paul? Paul's the second rower. They're different animals. Look, I sort of dodged that one. I just, because, and then it's comparing eras and so on, is he better than Jackie Kyle? Jamie said he's the best he's seen. Jamie's more than entitled to that. I think Johnny Sexton is a great player. What he has done the last 18 months is absolutely unbelievable and unprecedented because he has not reinvented himself. He's reinvigorated himself. So he's still playing this. Some players, they get older, they change their game and they don't take the ball to the line, they kick more or something. He's still playing the game, the basic game he did when he was a young guy, but he's playing it better. He dropped off 2019, he had a horrible year and he dropped off and I thought he was finished. I said he was finished. And everyone thought he was finished. And to this guy's undying credit, he has reinvigorated himself and come back and plays just extraordinary rugby at the highest level at the age he is. It is hard to argue with what Jamie is saying. For my own opinion, O'Driscoll is the best Irish player I have seen, and I might be biased in that because I coached him for 4 years, but that doesn't mean that Johnny Sexton is not an all-time great that deserves to be in our pantheon alongside Jackie Kyle and our, Willie John McBride and all the greats there. He certainly does.
Gerry, I never thought even we'd be having this conversation post O'Driscoll, and the fact that we are says it all.
Yeah, I remember when O'Connell and O'Driscoll retired thinking, well, that's it. We'll never make a World Cup semi-final or win a World Cup now. We've just lost our greatest ever forward, probably. Never mind lock. And our greatest ever back in Brian O'Driscoll. And it's funny how teams replenish themselves and greatness comes in other positions. You get a brilliant outside centre like Gary Ringrose, and you get fantastic other locks coming through the system as well. But then you get, for a while there, Conor Murray and Johnny Sexton were the best half-back partnership Irish rugby probably ever had. And that was taken over from Stringer Ungara, who had some high plateau and level of achievements as well. Like there was a period in 2018 when they were the two best players in their positions in the world. Johnny won World Player of the Year, deservedly so. Draco should have got it before that in 2008, 2009.
Yeah.
But Conor Murray was genuinely a candidate to win that award himself in 2018, had it not been for Johnny. Now, Conor's not scaled those heights since. I don't think his carrying game is quite the same. I think he's lost a bit of confidence in his carrying with that neck stroke, shoulder problem that he had. He just hasn't. But I thought he played very well in other respects, and I still think he's a valuable member of the squad. And it'll be one hell of achievement if he wins his 100th cap against South Africa in 2 weeks' time. That really is to be celebrated. And hats off to Jemison Gibson-Park for the way he's come through and taken the number 9 jersey from Ireland's greatest ever scrum half. But Matt's right, Johnny's reinvented himself almost in the last 2 years as well. And on top of a 2018 Grand Slam and World Player of the Year, he just masterminded a 2-1 away series win over the All Blacks. When you think of the way he sets standards in both the Leinster and Irish setups, the way he captains both teams, the way his goal kicking is world class. I know he missed one from inside the 22 that drew audible gasps from 45,000 people on Saturday, but he still is a running threat. He's a brilliant distributor. As Jemison Gibson-Park says, he's never played with a player like him that can just see space on the pitch that nobody else can. He's kept himself in brilliant nick for a 37-year-old. Let's put it this way. In the next 12 months, he's a chance to end that argument for all time.
That's the thing, isn't it? Yeah. Just one very last one on the game. Matt, you mentioned Carberry. There'll be an injury update on him in the next 48 hours. We're hearing Gerry, you with that in the Times this morning. So shoulder injury, extended his shoulder. His loss would be Frawley's gain. You said you thought he was quite good, Matt Carberry, the weekend?
Yeah, I've got my question marks on Joey in that he just can't get a run at things for a long period of time and play these big games, for an extended period of time. And he's had some difficulties this year. But I thought coming up against his old club, who know his brilliance, and they got obviously a strong defensive plan to nullify his footwork. He handled it very, very well. I thought he had a very composed performance, I suppose would be the term I'd use for when he was on the field. It's also interesting because I think this is linked to Frawley, and Frawley playing fullback, the lack of Hugo Keane not having played a game. I don't think there's any chance that they'll put him in straight against South Africa. So they may very well be looking at that, and I think even Joey being picked the other week as a 15 may have been a consideration for the national side to say, what are we going to do against South Africa? So the fact that Joey is now hurt again, which is just so... I can only imagine the frustration that he must feel. I can't imagine. Because when it happened, literally you could just see everyone go, oh, no, everyone in the place. Not again, the poor man. But it doesn't... To me, that injury doesn't look great. Okay. It doesn't look like a short-term one, as in 2 weeks.
It was kind of the way he extended himself, Matt, wasn't it, to try and haul Scott Penny back in. It's just like he kind of seemed to extend that shoulder. It wasn't like a bang or a stinger, was it?
No, and you quite often see it when guys score tries.
Yeah.
When they reach out and the weight just comes on the back of your shoulder, and it's the rear of the shoulder that gets either comes out or gets slightly separated. It just seemed that he'd done that, and the whole dynamics of the reach. I
think, Matt, we just lost you there, but we got the point.
It's Joey's misfortune, isn't he, that he is back up to potentially, or depending on your viewpoint, Jamie Heasl's viewpoint, Ireland's greatest player of all time. Like, it would have been like being an outside centre in the era of O'Driscoll. You know what I mean?
I know.
It's like you're comparing him unfairly, and he's he's had a very good career, if you allow for the fact that he should probably never have gone to the World Cup in 2019, and that probably set his career back 2 years in the event. And he's come back really well since then. I've mentioned before, he's had 5 wins against the All Blacks. It's not like he hasn't proved himself as backup to Johnny Sexton in many ways. I think he played brilliant rugby against the Bulls, which was good to see. He was playing well again. I think he is absolutely the out-and-out backup to Johnny, the number 2, and I think he deserves to be. I'm a fan. I think he's a very talented, gifted footballer and plays good rugby by and large, world-class goal kicker. But if he is ruled out, and I sincerely hope he isn't, the emergence of Kieran Frawley is very interesting. This is not the first time that Andy Farrell and Mike Catt and the Irish management have gone against the provinces in, the same way they brought James Gibson-Park pretty much quicker into the Irish setup when Luke McGrath was considered ahead of him, the Leinster pecking order. And there have been other examples. Leinster clearly prefer Ross Byrne as their out half, yet it's quite clear that Andy Farrell and Mike Catt want Kieran Frawley in there as one of their 3 out halves. And if Joey is ruled out, I'd imagine Frawley will be understudy out half to Johnny Sexton against the Springboks. 2
quick points before we wrap up. There's not much to say about the first one. It's just worth noting Michael Cheika is living his best life, isn't he? Like, what a dude. This guy's just amazing.
Great guy, isn't
he? So he's obviously still very much involved with Argentina. He's double jobbing at the moment. So he guided the Lebanon team to a Rugby League World Cup win against Ireland, 32-14. Parents born there, they emigrated in the 1950s to Australia, but even he did a roadshow with us where he talked lovingly about that part of the world and what it means to him. And so I think, should they beat Jamaica, a quarter-final against, guess who?
Australia, isn't it?
Ekans. So he strikes you as someone who has a wonderful perspective on the game, very self-assured, very charismatic, makes a very healthy living, we're all led to believe, from the fashion industry. So he's not sweating on the decisions of various rugby unions or hierarchies as to whether or not he gets another contract. He does things he likes doing, and this is one of the great examples.
Yeah, it sure is. The same way that he's also head coach of Argentina at the moment. So if they make that quarter-final against Australia, that's on the Friday, and 2 days later Argentina play England at Twickenham. So he'll be double jobbing that week, which is an extraordinary result. But I agree with you, like, huge time for Czechs. Very intelligent man, emotionally intelligent. Like, he did a great job with Australia, getting them to that World Cup final. They would have a really low ebb. We took over about a year and a half before that tournament. He's big into culture. He celebrated the Wallabies' very diverse background in that squad and had them all individually celebrate their backgrounds in front of their squad mates and made it a virtue and made it a strength. And just a really good guy. And to take over, it's a weird one, isn't it, to go into rugby league, but he's also very clever about embracing other sports, you know what I mean? He's had Aussie rules coached in with him. He's spent time with rugby league and Aussie rules coaches before. He's got a very holistic approach to it all. And he's good for the game, isn't he, Michael? Amazing. He's really good for the game. And when you think of it too, he's still very fondly remembered in Leinster because he was the man who got them to the promised land first time and stuff. And he's very, very fondly remembered still to this day and always will be.
Yeah, for sure. Well, so that's Cheika, and that's just an extraordinary story. So we'll see how he goes and how he manages the 2 jobs. The other last point, just to make briefly, Finn Russell. This is quite an interesting story. Omitted from the November squad. So he would have been unavailable for the first match against Australia. That falls outside the test window. Yeah. But for Fiji, New Zealand, Argentina, he has been omitted. What Gregor Townsend said was the squad he's picked is about rewarding form and consistency. For Finn, it's a challenge for him now to show his form and consistency over the next few weeks. Now, Finn Russell apparently played against Montpellier at the weekend, assisted 3 tries, had a very good game, scored 18 points. So naturally enough, the discord between Russell and Townsend has been much talked about in Scotland. 2020, when he left camp on the eve of the Six Nations, and then there was the year out and he's brought back in, and 2022 he's one of those 6 players who made the visit to the pub after Scotland's win over Italy and was left out of the final championship match against Ireland. So I saw, for instance, Peter Wright, the former prop, saying Gregor is pretty much saying he's not taking Finn to the World Cup here. Reading between the lines, if Blair Kinghorn and Adam Hastings play well, it could be the end of his Scotland career. Matt, I think you're back with us. This has been brewing for literally years now. And also, we should say, Stuart Hogg has been relieved of the captaincy. Jamie Ritchie's been named as captain as well. Hogg has said he's disappointed. But this looks like Townsend saying, a year out from the World Cup, sod this, I'm doing it my way. I'm not putting up with the crap anymore.
And I think you've also got a group of players, this is what I've been told anyway, a group of players within the team that you can see are trying their guts out. They give it all, and they're a bit fed up with a few of the senior boys thinking that they can get away with not. We talked about standards, not having the same standard off the field and on the field. There is. I'll give you an example that just over the summer, a Scottish friend just said that her rugby person just said, believe it or not, I do have one or two of them left. They said exactly that they didn't want them picked again because they just don't seem to be putting in the same effort. Now, Hogg is a fantastic player, but how many times have we seen Hogg make just these big errors in a game rather than just being a little bit more cautious, dropping the ball over the line, kicks out the full, so on. And then with Finn, it's just like putting effort in at times in defence where he needs to be. And I think the really hard part that Gregor faces is there's no doubt they are two of the most talented players in Scottish rugby, if not the two most talented players. But if your attitude's poor and that's affecting the performance of the team, you're really caught between a rock and a hard place. And I think he's given them every opportunity, and he's finally had to say, listen, I'm making a call here, and I'm going to back the group in my team that is dedicated and working hard and wants to do it the way we want to do it. Look, it's a really, really difficult position to be in. I've been there, but I'm not surprised. I'm actually surprised it's taken this long, but I definitely know the people replacing those players haven't got their talent. That's the really difficult part as a coach. You're making a call on attitude, not on skill.
Yeah, which is really interesting then to see how it unfolds, Gerry.
Isn't it? I mean, it's a shame on one level. I mean, I accept everything that Matt says, and Gregor Townsend has to make these calls. But Finn Russell is the most exciting, talented, gifted Scottish rugby player I've ever seen. Like that try that he instigated from his own 22 with that left to right skip pass, like a meteor from outer space. It was just an astonishing thing. And then at the end of the move was throwing out another lobbed right-handed skip pass for the try in the corner. Like he does things on a rugby pitch that I've never seen any other rugby player do. He's the Carlos Spencer of Northern Hemisphere rugby, and Carlos probably had his difficulties with coaches and then with him as well. I suppose that's what we get a little bit with the Maverick talent as well, because they go off script so much. But Finn Russell is now 31. I think he's won one Pro 12 title. And he's coming to the end in Racing. He's out of contract. He's leaving Racing at the end of the season. So what does the future hold for him? Certainly next year's Six Nations and the World Cup will be the poorer for the absence of somebody like Finn Russell. And you hope that this performance against Montpellier, Racing were in the doldrums. They were third from bottom a couple of weeks back, so they've climbed back up to mid-table now. You would hope that by throwing down the gauntlet to him, they will get a response out of him. He knuckles down and starts playing such fabulous rugby that he cannot be ignored, because, like I said, he's 31, and what's next if he doesn't go to World Cup, and what does he do at the end of the season with Racing?
Gents, thank you very much. Matt Williams, pleasure. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Jay. Thanks, Gerry.
Cheers, Matt.
Gerry Thornley of the Irish Times. Thanks, Gerry. Appreciate it.
Joe.
Rugby and Off the Ball is thanks to Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.
Monday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the